In the white silence beside Lake Superior, an abandoned drive-in still faced the stars. Calder Wainwright kept its lights alive, though he no longer knew what he was waiting for. Then, after a January storm, he found dog tracks circling a sealed projection room. Inside, an old German shepherd lay on a dead man's coat, guarding a memory no one had finished. Her name was Vesper, and she had not come back for a secret. She came back for a sound, a home, and a door someone might finally leave open. If this story touches your heart, tell us where you're watching from, and please like and subscribe to help Seal K9 Tales reach 5,000 subscribers so we can keep creating stories like this. January laid its white hand over Aurora Vale with the hush of an old prayer no one in Coldwater Reach was brave enough to say aloud. The drive-in theater sat on the Michigan side of Lake Superior, where winter did not simply arrive. It ruled. Snow covered the rows of empty parking spaces until the whole field looked like a frozen sea, broken only by the small black crowns of speaker posts rising in quiet lines. At the far end of the lot, the great screen stood weathered and pale, a sail from a ship that had run aground and then decided, out of stubbornness or grief, never to move again. When the wind came over the lake, it struck that screen with a low, hollow moan. Some nights, Calder Wainwright thought it sounded almost like film running through an old projector. Almost? He stood outside the ticket booth before dawn, one gloved hand resting on the breaker box. He was 58, tall, broad-shouldered, still built with the dense strength of a man who had once carried weight through water, mud, and fear. His army green T-shirt clung beneath an open charcoal flannel despite the cold inside the booth. And when he reached up, the faded Navy SEAL tattoo on his right arm showed beneath his sleeve like an old oath the skin had never forgotten. His hair had grown too long for the man he used to be. Dark brown, threaded with silver, pushed back by habit and ruined again by the wind. His jaw carried several days of gray-brown stubble. His eyes, blue-gray and tired, watched the star-shaped sign above the entrance as he threw the switch. The sign blinked. Ayur. Then darkness. Calder waited. The wind crossed the lot in a long white breath. The sign blinked again. Vale. He wrote it down in the maintenance notebook. Sign. Partial power. Same as yesterday. He did not write. Like everything else. Every morning was the same. Shovel the emergency exits. Check the generator. Test the fuel line. Count the fire extinguishers. Walk the fence. Inspect the booth. Record the weather. Record the faults. Record the things that could still be controlled. Aurora Vale had not shown a movie in years, but Calder maintained it as if an audience might roll in by sunset, with paper tickets, fogged windshields, children asking for popcorn, and couples pretending not to watch each other more than the screen. He did not love movies. That had been Mara's kingdom. Mara had known the names of directors, actors, projection lenses, even the old speakers by row. She could stand in the middle of this lot in July and describe how the place used to glow when she was a girl, when her father owned it, and Lake Superior summer nights smelled of motor oil, cut grass, and buttered popcorn. Calder had listened back then with the patient expression of a man who believed listening was the same as understanding. It was not. After Mara died, her will left the place in an arrangement as practical and complicated as she had become in the years after their separation. Their daughter, Nori, held the deciding vote on whether Aurora Vale would be sold or converted. Calder had temporary residence and management rights, while the paperwork remained unresolved. A local development trust waited like a polite wolf at the edge of the trees, ready to buy the land if the county confirmed the property was no longer safe for public use. Calder did not blame them. Not exactly. The roof over the old projection building sagged under snow. The concession stand needed rewiring. The speaker posts leaned like tired soldiers. The lake wind found every crack. Still, every morning, he wrote things down. He had learned long ago that a man could survive almost anything if he broke it into tasks. He had also learned that surviving was not the same as being saved. By 7, the eastern sky had gone silver. Snow brightened across the lot until Calder had to narrow his eyes. He locked the breaker box, hooked the key ring back onto his belt, and began his fence walk. The ring held 15 keys and one cracked piece of old mica, shaped like a star, salvaged from the theater sign after a storm years ago. He turned it between thumb and forefinger when he was thinking, or when he was not allowing himself to think. The back of the property sloped toward a line of pines, beyond them the lake. The previous night's storm had blown powder into smooth ridges. Calder moved along the building with a shovel in one hand, boots sinking deep, his breath leaving him in disciplined clouds. Halfway around the projection building, he stopped. Tracks, not deer, not fox, not the waddling punctuation of raccoons. Dog. Large dog. The prints cut across the snow from the eastern fence, circled once near the generator shed, then returned toward the rear wall of the old projection building. Calder crouched, brushed powder away with 2 fingers, and studied the shape. The animal had favored one rear leg. The stride was uneven. Slow at first, then hurried near the building. He followed the prints. They did not lead back to the road. That was the first thing that bothered him. Animals in winter knew how to leave. They followed scent, warmth, garbage, road salt, sound. But these tracks kept circling the same sealed building as though the dog had arrived at the one place in the world it recognized and found every proper entrance closed. At the rear of the projection house, beneath a rusted metal awning, a narrow wooden panel hung crooked in the wall. Calder remembered the feature from old repair maps, a film transfer pass-through, used decades ago to move reels between lower storage and the stairs that led up to the booth. The storm had torn one side loose. Snow had drifted beneath it. Calder knelt again. A smear of dark fur clung to a splinter. The tracks vanished into the gap. Then he heard it, a low sound from inside the wall. Not a bark, not quite. A hoarse, exhausted whine. Calder's first instinct was movement, fast, direct, decisive. Shoulder the door, break the lock, get in. His body remembered urgency before his mind offered permission. He stood still. The county restriction notice was stapled to the side door 10 feet away, laminated and rimmed with frost. Unsafe upper structure, limited entry only. Report access. Calder stared at it for one long second. Then he pulled out his phone and called Ellis Boone. Ellis answered on the 4th ring, voice rough with sleep and coffee. "If the screen finally fell over, tell it to wait until I put pants on." "Dog inside the projection building," Calder said. "Entered through the rear transfer panel. Side door is iced shut. Upper structure still sealed. I'm accessing lower level only." A pause. Fabric rustled. Ellis was awake now. "Alive?" "Sounds like it." "You alone?" "Yes." "Of course you are." Ellis exhaled. "Don't go upstairs. Don't play hero. That building coughs wrong, and Tamsin Greer will have both our hides." "I'm not going upstairs." That sounded almost like obedience. "I'm frightened." Calder looked at the door. "I'll call after." "You'll call before if anything shifts." Calder ended the call and slid the phone into his pocket. The side door was half buried under wind-packed snow. He cleared it with the shovel, then tried the key. The lock refused to turn. Frozen solid. He did not curse. He went to the maintenance shed, returned with a heat gun, extension cord, and hand tools, then spent 15 minutes warming the metal and loosening the hinge pins one by one. The dog made no more sound. That was worse. When the door finally came free, Calder pulled it open just wide enough to enter. Cold, stale air breathed out of the building. It carried dust, old wood, machine oil, and something else. the faint animal smell of fear held too long in one place. He clicked on his flashlight. The beam cut across stacked chairs, empty film cans, a cracked stool, curled posters gone soft at the edges. The lower storage room looked smaller than he remembered. Snowlight leaked through the broken transfer panel, turning the dust into slow-moving stars. "Easy," Calder said. His voice sounded strange in the room. Too low, too human. A shape shifted under the old work table. Calder lowered the flashlight. The German shepherd lay on a brown coat, body drawn tight, head raised. Female, older, black saddle across the back, deep gold along the chest and legs, gray beginning at the muzzle and around the eyes. One ear stood tall, the left folded slightly at the tip, giving her an expression both noble and wounded. Her ribs showed beneath the winter coat, not sharply enough to tell one story, but enough to tell a long one. Her front paws were cracked from the snow and ice. She watched Calder without blinking, not wild, not tame enough, just waiting to learn which kind of man had opened the door. Calder crouched, keeping his shoulders turned slightly away. He had dealt with frightened animals before, though never enough to call himself good at it. Dogs respected patience better than speeches. "Not here to take it," he said. The shepherd's right paw moved. She placed it over the coat. Calder saw the name stitched in fading thread near the collar. Amos Lyle, last projectionist of Aurora Vale. White beard, red suspenders, laugh like gravel in a coffee can. He had lived 3 miles out until age and illness moved him into care, and later out of this world altogether. Calder had not gone to the funeral. He had meant to send a note. Meaning to do a thing he had learned did not leave much behind. Near the dog's front leg sat a hollow metal film core. Beside it lay a torn strip of paper label, yellowed and curled. Winter Voices. Calder reached no farther. His eyes moved to the coat pocket, where a corner of folded paper showed. The shepherd's paw pressed harder. "All right," he murmured. "Yours for now." At that, something changed in the dog's face. Not trust. Trust was too large a word, too often stolen by people in a hurry. But the hard line around her eyes loosened. Calder backed out of the room and returned with water in a shallow pan, then a little warm broth from the booth. He set both several feet away and retreated to the doorway. The shepherd did not move until he turned his back. Only then came the faint sound of drinking. Calder stood facing the snow outside, listening as if the small laps of her tongue were a coded transmission from some distant coast. Alive, he thought, that was all. Just alive. And yet the word moved through him with unexpected force. He called Ellis. Then he called Dr. Corinne Halstead. Corinne arrived before noon in an aging pickup with a veterinary emblem fading on the door and a pair of wool mittens clipped to her coat, like she did not trust herself to keep them. She was in her mid-50s, compact, calm, with blonde-gray hair tied low and the steady hands of a woman who had convinced frightened creatures to accept help for most of her life. She took one look under the table and said softly, "Oh, Vesper?" The shepherd's ears shifted. Calder looked at her. "You know her?" "I treated her for Amos, arthritis mostly, some weight loss after he went into the facility." Corinne set her bag down slowly. "She's been missing 2 days. June Lyle's been calling half the county." "June?" "Amos's niece. Took Vesper after he passed." Corinne glanced at the coat under the dog. "Tried hard from what I saw. But grief has teeth, Calder. Not just in people." Vesper allowed Corinne closer than she had allowed Calder. Not much closer, but enough. Corinne examined her with practiced patience. Paws, gums, eyes, joints. No dramatic injuries. No hidden cruelty. Dehydration. Cold stress. Cracked pads. A body worn down by age, winter, and refusing food because the world had changed its smell. "She wasn't abandoned," Corinne said after a while. "She ran back." To a condemned projection house? To Amos? Corinne's voice held no judgment. Or to the last place she understood him? Calder said nothing. Corinne gave instructions. Small meals, warmth, not heat, pad treatment, arthritis medication, no forcing contact. Let her choose the room. Let her choose the distance. "Can she stay here tonight?" Calder asked. Corinne looked around at the cracked walls, the tools, the sealed stairwell, the snowlight through the broken panel. "Not in this building?" Her eyes returned to him. "In the booth, maybe, if you can make it safe, and if she agrees." "If she agrees," Calder repeated. It sounded foolish. It also sounded right. When Corinne stepped outside to call June, Calder finally eased the folded paper from Amos's coat. Vesper watched, but did not stop him. Perhaps Corinne's presence had changed the treaty. Perhaps the dog was too tired. The note was written in a shaky hand. "Mavis knows how to let the picture speak again. No signature, no explanation. Just that." Calder folded it once and placed it in his shirt pocket. The paper felt strangely heavy there. By late afternoon, the lower room had been secured, the broken transfer panel temporarily covered, and Vesper had been coaxed, not carried, never carried, across the snow toward the ticket booth. She walked stiffly, pausing twice to look back at the projection building. Calder did not pull the leash. He did not speak. He simply waited each time until she chose another step. The booth was small but warm. A cot stood against the back wall, folded military blanket at its foot. A hot plate, a dented kettle, shelves of maintenance records. Mara's old cash register still sat beneath the cloth because Calder had never decided whether covering it was respect or cowardice. He laid a wool blanket near the heater, far enough from the door that the draft would not reach. Corinne had left soft food, ointment, and pills wrapped in paper with neat instructions. Vesper sniffed the blanket. Then she turned and limped to the closed inner door that led toward the projection building corridor. She lowered herself onto Amos's coat, which Calder had placed nearby after brushing off the dust. Of course, Calder thought. Of course. Night came early. The lake wind strengthened, pushing loose snow across the lot in pale ribbons. The giant screen vanished and reappeared beyond the window like a moonlit cliff. Somewhere in the sign wiring, a relay clicked every few minutes, trying and failing to finish the theater's name. Calder sat on the floor several feet from Vesper with a mug of coffee gone cold in his hands. Temporary, he told himself. The dog had legal family. June would come. Corinne would handle the arrangements. Norrie would arrive soon with papers and decisions, and that careful, quiet disappointment she wore whenever he proved exactly as distant as expected. Temporary. Vesper slept fitfully. Her paws twitched once. Her folded ear trembled. Then, from somewhere deep in a dream, she made a small broken sound. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough. Calder looked toward the lamp on the counter. He had planned to turn it off. Darkness saved power. Darkness was practical. Darkness made a room simpler. Vesper whimpered again and pressed her muzzle harder into Amos's coat. Outside, wind crossed the white screen, and Aurora Vale answered with its old hollow voice. Calder rose, but not to switch off the light. He turned the lampshade slightly, so the glow fell softer across the floor. Then he sat back down, leaving the room half-lit, leaving the door unlatched, leaving the night less absolute than it had been. Vesper did not wake, but her breathing changed, slowly, carefully, like an old projector finding its rhythm after years of silence. It steadied. Calder wrapped both hands around the cold mug and watched over her until the snow erased every footprint outside except the ones that had led her home. Norrie Wainwright arrived at Aurora Vale in a rented Subaru the color of wet slate, its sides crusted white with road salt from the long drive north. Calder saw the car before he saw her. It came slowly through the entrance beneath the broken star sign, tires cutting two dark lines through the snow. The old ticket booth window reflected her approach in a warped little rectangle, as if the past had decided to return not as a ghost, but as paperwork with headlights. He stood outside with a shovel in one hand and the key ring at his belt. The army green t-shirt showed beneath his open work jacket because he had stepped out too quickly after hearing the engine. Vesper lay inside the booth, not sleeping, not fully awake, her muzzle resting on Amos Lyle's brown coat. Norrie parked crookedly beside the concession stand. For a moment, she stayed behind the wheel. Calder could see her through the windshield, forehead tipped toward the steering wheel, both hands still holding it. Then she inhaled, opened the door, and stepped into the snow. She was 34 now, tall like her mother, steady like herself, with Calder's blue-gray eyes set in a face that had learned to expect little and notice everything. Her chestnut hair was tied low at the back of her neck. A navy parka framed her shoulders, and a pair of black headphones hung around her neck as if she had brought part of her work with her, because silence in this family could not be trusted unsupervised. Calder crossed the lot to meet her. "You make the last curve all right?" he asked. Norrie looked at him. A small gust moved snow across her boots. "Good to see you too, Dad." The sentence was not sharp. That made it worse. Calder shifted the shovel in his hand. "Road gets bad past the county line." "It did. You should have waited till morning." "It is morning." He glanced toward the pale sky as though it might provide a technical defense. It did not. For one odd second, he wanted to hug her. The thought came at him like a deer out of roadside trees. Sudden, living, almost impossible to respond to correctly. By the time he decided to move, Norrie had turned to the back seat and reached for a folder thick with documents. That was easier. Paper knew what it wanted. Inside the ticket booth, the heat made the windows fog at the corners. Vesper lifted her head when Norrie entered. The old shepherd's right ear stood at attention while the left tipped softly forward. Norrie stopped, one hand still on the door. "So this is her," she said. "Vesper? She's beautiful." "She's old." "That too." The dog watched Norrie with the careful dignity of a queen receiving a visitor in a kingdom that had recently misplaced its throne. Norrie crouched, not reaching out. Calder noticed. Most people reached first and thought later. "Hi, Vesper," Norrie said quietly. "I'm not here to take your coat." Vesper's eyes moved once toward Amos's coat, then back to Norrie. After a long moment, she lowered her head again. Calder did not say he was impressed. The Wainwright family had never been good at praising the things most in need of praise. Instead, he took 2 mugs down from the shelf and poured coffee. Norrie opened the folder on the small counter beside Mara's covered cash register. "We need to talk about the offer." Calder placed her mug beside the documents. "You drove 6 hours for that?" "I drove 6 hours because Mom's attorney needs an answer before the end of the month. The Development Trust increased the number." "They would." "They're not villains." "I didn't say they were." "You made the face." "I have one face." "You have several. Most of them mean no." Vesper blinked once, perhaps in agreement. Norrie slid the top paper across the counter. "Mom's medical debt didn't vanish because we loved her. The property taxes didn't vanish. The roof, the wiring, the insurance problem, none of it vanishes because you keep shoveling the exits of a place nobody's allowed to enter." Calder looked down at the paper, but the numbers blurred into lines. Selling Aurora Vale made sense. That was the trouble. Sense could be brutal because it did not need to raise its voice. "Mara didn't leave this place to rot," he said. "No, but she also didn't leave us a working theater. She left us a question with a bill attached." Outside, another truck rolled into the lot. Ellis Boone arrived first in a volunteer fire department pickup with a cracked antenna and a thermos rolling loose on the passenger seat. He got out wearing a heavy rescue jacket with reflective stripes, a black knit cap pulled low, and the expression of a man who had already seen 3 preventable problems before breakfast. Behind him came a county vehicle. Tamsin Greer stepped out with a hard case, a rolled set of plans, and no visible patience for nostalgia. She was in her mid-40s, compact and straight-backed, wearing a gray-blue technical jacket, steel-toed winter boots, and a white hard hat she put on before speaking to anyone. A bright orange marking pen was clipped to her chest pocket like a tiny warning flag. Ellis nodded toward Norrie. "You must be the daughter with common sense." Norrie raised an eyebrow. "Depends who you ask." "I'm asking me. Safer sample size." Tamsin had already begun looking at the projection building. "Is anyone entering the upper booth today?" "No," Calder said. "Good. I enjoy mornings without arguments." Ellis gave Calder a look. "You hear that? New experience for you." Calder ignored him. The inspection took nearly 2 hours. Ellis checked the extinguishers, exits, fuel storage, breaker box, and generator shed. He had the solid movements of a man who trusted routine, not because it was heroic, but because routine kept funerals from multiplying. He asked questions. Calder answered precisely. The 2 men spoke the language of valves, shutoffs, exits, load, smoke, access. Tamsin spoke a harsher language, failure points. She marked the eastern storage wall with orange paint. She measured snow load on the projection building roof from the outside. She photographed cracks in beams visible through a lower opening. She tapped wood with the handle of a tool and listened as if the old theater were a patient too proud to admit its bones hurt. Norrie followed at a distance, hands in her coat pockets, taking in what Calder had taught himself not to see. The sag over the roofline, the patched wiring, the water stains. The way one corner of the building seemed to lean toward the lake, as if tired of standing against winter. When they returned to the booth, Tamsin laid her notebook on the counter. "Upper projection room stays sealed," she said. "No exceptions. East storage is restricted until supported or demolished. The concession building is in better shape, but not approved for public gathering. With limited reinforcement, it could be used for temporary emergency warming under supervision. Temporary, limited, documented." Calder said nothing. Tamsin looked at him as if silence were a material she had tested before and found unreliable. "Mr. Wainwright, if you want any part of this place to remain useful, stop treating it like a private memory. Treat it like a structure people may actually walk into." The words landed harder than Calder wanted to show. Norrie looked down at her coffee. Ellis suddenly found the fire extinguisher tag fascinating. Calder's jaw worked once. "Understood." Tamsin studied him. "I hope so, because buildings don't care how much grief is stored inside them. They come down anyway." Vesper rose from the coat then, stiff and careful. She walked to the inner door and stood before it, not touching it, just facing the closed seam. The room went quiet. Norrie's gaze softened. "She does that a lot?" "Since last night." "Doors?" "Maybe." "Or endings," Norrie said. Calder gave her a look. She shrugged. "Sound people notice patterns." Before he could answer, another vehicle entered the lot. A small blue hatchback with one missing hubcap and a hospice care sticker in the back window. It stopped near the booth, and a woman in green scrubs under a dark puffer jacket hurried out with a leash in one hand and a plastic folder in the other. June Lyle looked like a person who had slept in pieces for a week. Late 40s, light brown hair hastily tied back, pale eyes rimmed red from cold and worry. She saw Vesper through the booth window and stopped as if her knees had nearly forgotten their job. "Oh, Vess?" The shepherd turned. For the first time since Norrie arrived, Vesper's tail moved. Not a full wag, more like the memory of one. June came in slowly, tears already breaking loose, and sank down on the floor before anyone told her it was cold. Vesper went to her. The old dog pressed her head against June's chest, and June folded both arms around her neck. "I'm sorry," June whispered. "I'm so sorry, girl." No one spoke. Even Ellis, who normally distrusted silence unless he had created it, stood still. June smelled faintly of antiseptic, road salt, and exhaustion. Calder watched her hands move over Vesper's fur with the aching competence of someone who had tried. There was no cruelty there, no neglect hidden behind excuses. Only a woman who had inherited grief with paws and had not known how to make it eat. "She wouldn't settle," June said after a while, speaking to the floor more than to Calder. "I put Amos's blanket in the living room. I left the garage open during the day so she could smell his car. I tried the food Corinne gave me. She'd take a bite, then go lie by the door. Every night." Vesper stepped away from June then. She returned to Amos's coat. June watched her lower herself onto it. The sound she made was small and broken, but she wiped her face quickly, as if ashamed to spend too much sorrow in front of strangers. "I love her," she said. "But I can't keep dragging her back to a house she thinks is the wrong ending." Corinne hadn't come, but her advice arrived through June's folder. Medical notes, medication schedule, ownership papers, vaccination records. June placed them on the counter like offerings to a court that had not been assembled. Norrie touched the folder gently. "Maybe no one decides today?" June nodded, grateful too fast. Calder looked at Vesper. "Corinne said observe a few days." "Corinne is usually right," Ellis said. "Annoying local tradition." Tamsin packed her tools. "As long as the dog stays out of restricted areas, I have no structural opinion on her emotional jurisdiction." For the first time that morning, Norrie smiled. It changed her face so suddenly, Calder had to look away. After Ellis and Tamsin left, after June sat with Vesper for another half hour and promised to come back the next day, the booth felt larger and more crowded at the same time. Documents lay beside dog records. The inspection report sat beside Mara's covered cash register. Amos's coat occupied the floor like a relic no church would know how to classify. Calder went outside to test the generator. Norrie followed, zipping her parka. The generator shed stood beside the concession building. Calder opened the vent, checked the fuel valve, then started the machine. It coughed once, then settled into a deep, steady vibration that traveled through the frozen ground and into the walls. From inside the booth came the softest sound, not fear, relief. Norrie turned. Through the fogged glass, they saw Vesper lower her body completely for the first time that day. Her head came down onto her paws, her eyes half closed. The vibration hummed through the building like an old animal breathing under the floorboards. Norrie did not speak for several seconds. "She remembers the rhythm," she said finally. "Generator? Maybe. Or what came after it. Projector, people moving around, Amos working, summer nights, cars, voices." She slipped the headphones from around her neck and held them in one hand. "Sound is a place, Dad. Sometimes more than a place is." Calder watched Vesper through the glass. He had thought the dog returned because of Amos's coat. One object, one scent, one lost man. But Norrie was right. Vesper had returned to an entire world, a pattern of life, a kingdom of small noises, film threading, speakers crackling, shoes on old boards, Mara laughing somewhere in the background of a summer night he had failed to keep. Back inside, Norrie found the folded note in Amos's coat pocket, where Calder had left it inside a clear plastic sleeve. "Mavis knows how to let the picture speak again." "Mavis Rorden," Norrie said. Calder looked up. "You know her?" "Mom wrote to her." Norrie opened her laptop on the counter. "A few times. I saw the name in a box after the funeral." "We don't need to chase that tonight." "I'm not chasing. I'm looking up an address." "Norrie." She paused, fingers over the keyboard. "What?" The old tone hovered between them. Father as warning system, daughter as weather front. "We don't know what this is," he said. "No, that's why people ask. Or they leave it alone until they understand the consequences." She gave a small laugh, but it held no humor. That may be the most Calder Wainwright sentence ever spoken. He felt the words harden in him before he chose them. "You don't understand what it costs when a decision goes wrong." Norrie closed the laptop slowly. "No," she said, "I don't." The booth seemed to tighten around them. Calder should have stopped. He knew the shape of the cliff before stepping closer to it, but some old defenses did not ask permission before rising. "War takes things from a person," he said. Norrie's face changed. Not anger yet, something worse. Recognition. "And you gave it the rest for free." He stared at her. She stood now, one hand flat on the counter beside Mara's covered cash register. "I don't know what happened over there because you never told me. I don't know what Ian's name sounded like when you said it because you never said it in front of me. I don't know what kept you awake because all I heard growing up was doors closing." Calder's voice dropped. "That's not fair." "No, it isn't." Her eyes shone, but she did not let the tears fall. "It wasn't fair to Mom either." The heater clicked. Snow tapped softly against the window. Somewhere outside, the generator settled into a lower hum. Calder looked at the floor. Vesper had risen. The old shepherd moved slowly between them, nails clicking on wood. She did not bark. She did not press against the door. She came to the narrow space between father and daughter and lowered herself with a careful sigh. Her head faced Calder. One front paw stretched out until it touched Norrie's boot. Neither of them moved. It was such a small bridge. Fur, bone, breath, one tired paw resting against road-salted leather. Ridiculous, maybe. But the room had been full of closed things, covered registers, sealed doors, folded papers, unsaid names, and Vesper had placed herself in the only open space left. Norrie looked down at her. Calder did too. For a long while, the three of them remained that way. The man who had mistaken silence for protection, the daughter who had learned to translate absence into anger, and the old dog who still did not know whether love meant staying, leaving, or lying across the threshold until someone finally understood the door. Outside, snow continued to fall. Not hard, not dramatically. Just lightly enough that it seemed the sky was trying, with all its vast white hands, not to hurt anything further that night. Mavis Riordan arrived at Aurora Vale in a van that looked as if it had personally argued with every winter road in Michigan and lost most of the debates. It was an old cream-colored thing with rust along the wheel wells, two mismatched side mirrors, and a rear window crowded by stickers from film archives, libraries, and one defiant blue rectangle that read, "Rewind" or "Regret." Snow clung to the bumper in dirty lumps. The engine rattled even after she turned it off, like it wished to continue complaining on her behalf. Calder watched from the concession doorway while Norrie crossed the lot first. Vesper stood beside Calder, weight shifted carefully off her stiff rear leg. The German shepherd's ears lifted at the unfamiliar engine, one sharp, one softly bent. She did not bark. She only watched as the driver's door opened and a short woman in a plum cardigan under a heavy parka climbed down with surprising force. Dr. Mavis Riordan was 67, round at the edges, with short silver curls escaping from a knitted hat and a pair of glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. Another pair sat on top of her head. A third emerged from her coat pocket when she leaned into the van and began pulling out boxes. Norrie hurried to help. "Careful," Mavis said. "That one contains film gloves, archival spacers, and my emotional stability." Norrie paused. "Which part is fragile?" "All of it, depending on who's speaking." Calder stepped forward and took the heavier case without asking. Mavis turned and looked him over from his wind-tangled hair to his work boots, pausing briefly at the faded Navy SEAL tattoo visible beneath the sleeve of his green t-shirt. "So," she said, "you're Calder." He nodded once. "Ma'am?" Mavis made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a cough. "Mara said you could fix a generator in a blizzard, but couldn't repair an apology on a sunny day." Norrie looked down immediately, though not fast enough to hide the small tug at her mouth. Calder held the case. "Sounds like her." "Good. You did recognize your own obituary." "I'm not dead." "No, but men like you often send advance drafts." For the first time in days, the silence in Aurora Vale did not feel frozen. It felt startled. Mavis did not ask permission to enter the concession building. She moved with the authority of a woman who had spent decades rescuing history from damp basements, careless relatives, underfunded museums, and men who said, "It's probably fine," while standing beside something actively decaying. The concession stand became a temporary archive within 20 minutes. Mavis cleared one table with her hip, laid down clean cloth, unpacked cotton gloves, labeled envelopes, humidity strips, a small hand-cranked viewer, and a portable light box. Norrie set up her laptop nearby, coiling cables with the relief of someone entering a language she understood. Calder stayed near the door. That was his usual place when other people entered a room. Close enough to respond, far enough not to belong. Vesper wandered once around the table, sniffed Mavis's case, then lowered herself near Amos's coat, which Calder had brought from the booth. The old dog's eyes did not leave the boxes. Mavis noticed. "Hello, Vesper," she said gently, the humor leaving her voice for the first time. "Still guarding the kingdom, are we?" The shepherd's tail shifted once. "You knew her?" Calder asked. "I knew Amos. Knowing Amos meant knowing Vesper. He used to claim she had better taste in films than half the county board." Mavis opened a small tin and removed a pair of white gloves. He was correct, of course. She slept through a terrible documentary about municipal drainage. Norrie laughed softly. Calder did not, but his face changed just enough for the room to notice. Mavis looked around the concession stand, the old popcorn machine under a sheet, the faded menu board, the emergency lanterns Calder kept charged, the patched wall near the breaker. "Mara wanted this room full of blankets," Mavis said. "Not popcorn." Norrie turned. "Blankets?" "And canned soup, radio batteries, snow shovels, fuel logs, lists of who lived alone past the West Ridge." Mavis pulled a notebook from her satchel. "You thought Winter Voices was a movie." Calder's shoulders tightened. "Wasn't it?" "It was a movie the way a lighthouse is a lamp." Outside, wind dragged snow dust across the lot. The pale screen stood beyond the windows, listening like a giant that had heard its name after years of sleep. Mavis opened the notebook but did not offer it yet. "Mara and Amos filmed over several winters," she said. "Not birthdays, not vacations, not smiling family nonsense where everyone waves at the camera as if the future won't dare touch them. They recorded Coldwater Reach when the lake shut roads down, when power failed, when the elderly were stuck behind drifts, when the phone lines crackled and people had to remember they belonged to one another." Norrie's hand stilled over her laptop. "She never told me it was that serious," she said. "She may have tried." The words were not accusing. Somehow, that made them heavier. Mavis continued. "Aurora Vale was supposed to become two places. A summer drive-in, yes. Mara loved the pageantry of it. Cars under stars, children dropping popcorn, teenagers lying badly about not holding hands. But in winter, she wanted the concession building turned into a warming station. Generator, propane stove, cots, emergency radio. The lot could take vehicles when the roads were questionable. The screen could be used for county notices if communications went down. She had diagrams. Calder looked toward the generator shed through the frosted glass. For years he had maintained that machine out of habit. Changed the oil, run the line, test the load, record the date. He had told himself he did it because neglected machinery offended him, because leaving equipment to fail was undisciplined. Now the simple truth rose slowly, embarrassingly, like an old sign flickering back to life. He had been tending a dream without knowing its name. Mavis turned a page and slid the notebook toward Norrie, not Calder. Norrie saw the first sketch and covered her mouth with one hand. "What?" Calder asked. She turned the book so he could see. Mara's handwriting filled the margins. Arrows, measurements, notes about generator capacity, heat zones, volunteer lists. There was a rough drawing of the concession room with "Coffee here" underlined twice, and beside it, in smaller letters, "Calder will hate folding cots. Let him hate useful things." Norrie made a sound that was almost a laugh and almost grief. Calder read the line 3 times. He had once been known so well it had become a joke in the margins of a plan he never knew existed. That was when Vesper rose. The dog walked to the table and pressed her nose to the edge of the notebook. Mavis did not pull it away. Vesper inhaled once, twice, then looked toward the back wall where the old speaker wire entered from the projection building. "She remembers work," Norrie said. Mavis nodded. "Work is easier to survive than absence." The first film they opened was not opened quickly. Mavis insisted the metal container sit in the room for an hour before she broke the seal. She explained temperature shock to Calder twice because he kept looking at the can as if it were a locked door he had decided not to kick. "You rush old film," she said, "and it punishes you by becoming confetti." "I wasn't touching it. You were thinking loudly." Norrie smiled without looking up from her notes. When Mavis finally lifted the lid, the room changed. There was no dramatic music, no revelation leaping into their hands. Just a faint chemical tang, paper labels, a reel of film wound around its core, the fragile body of memory resting in metal. Mavis leaned close, inhaled carefully, and nodded. "Not perfect, not doomed." "That's a professional category?" Calder asked. "It is the largest professional category." She did not run the film through the old projector. She did not even consider it. Instead, she put on gloves, checked the edges by hand, used the light box to examine a few frames, and recorded damage in a neat script. Some sections had shrinkage. Some had edge wear. A few were cloudy with age. But much of it could be saved if sent to the restoration lab in Marquette. Norrie leaned in as the first strip passed over the light. Tiny images appeared frame by frame: a man shoveling a porch, a line of trucks under snow, a woman laughing beside a stack of blankets, the Aurora Vale sign glowing whole in some winter before it learned to blink in pieces. Calder stood behind them close enough to see, far enough to pretend he was not trying. Then Mavis opened a separate plastic case. "This," she said, "is less precious but easier to play. Amos transferred a few minutes to videotape years ago, probably as a sample for Mara." She set up a small monitor on the counter. Norrie connected an adapter from her bag. The screen came alive with blue static, then a shaky image. Aurora Vale appeared, not dead, not silent. Winter lay over the lot, but the place was full of motion. A younger Amos's voice grumbled behind the camera. "Mara, if you stand any farther left, you'll look like you're being swallowed by the ticket booth." Then Mara stepped into frame. Calder forgot for half a breath how to stand. She wore a red winter hat he remembered and a coat he did not. Her hair whipped across her face. She tried to hold several pages against her chest while the wind stole one and sent it skittering across the snow. "Amos, don't just film it," she laughed. "Catch it?" "I am documenting the natural life cycle of planning documents," Amos replied from behind the camera. Mara chased the page, slipped, recovered, and bowed as if to an invisible audience. Norrie made a small sound beside Calder. Not crying. Not quite. On the screen, Mara returned breathless, cheeks flushed. She looked directly into the lens. For an instant, years fell away with such force that Calder's chest tightened. "This is Aurora Vale," she said. "In summer, people come here to watch stories. In winter, maybe they should come here to remember they are inside one." The video crackled. Behind the camera, Amos said, "Star signs out again?" Mara looked up and laughed. "Then Calder can fix it. He likes pretending electricity respects him." Nori looked at her father then. Calder did not move. Vesper did. The old shepherd rose from the floor with sudden urgency and came toward the monitor. Her nails clicked softly. She sat directly in front of the screen, ears lowered, eyes fixed not on Mara, but slightly beyond her, toward the sound of Amos's voice. The tape hissed. Amos muttered something about frozen fingers. Mara laughed again. Vesper's whole body leaned forward. When the sample ended and the screen went black, the dog touched her nose to the glass. "Once?" Then she turned to Calder. There was no human question in her eyes. Not really. Dogs did not ask why the dead did not step out of machines. That was a human cruelty, imagining animals simple enough to be spared longing. But Vesper looked at Calder as if he belonged to the same category of creatures who had seen someone vanish and still listened for the sound of their return. Calder stepped back. "I need air," he said. No one stopped him. Outside, the cold struck his face hard enough to feel merciful. He grabbed the shovel from where it leaned beside the door and began clearing the path toward the main screen, though the path was already visible beneath a thin dusting of fresh snow. Push, lift, throw, push, lift, throw. The motion steadied him. Muscles did not ask questions. Snow did not ask why he had not known. The shovel had no opinion about the fact that Mara had built plans around him, joked about him, worked around his silence, and somehow kept loving a place he had mistaken for a burden. Behind him, the concession door opened. Nori came out, but didn't speak. She stood near the end of the cleared path, hands in her parka pockets, looking up at the great white screen. Snow had begun to stick to the peeling paint in delicate clusters. In the afternoon light, it looked as if stars were falling upward and getting caught there. For a long time, father and daughter watched the screen. Finally, Calder said, "She never told me." Nori's breath formed a cloud. Maybe she did in smaller ways. He wanted to reject that. The instinct rose, armed and ready. Instead, he set the shovel blade into the snow and leaned on the handle. "I thought she kept this place because of her father," he said, "because of summer. Because people do that with old places. They make shrines and then get angry when the roof leaks." Nori glanced at him. "That's a very romantic interpretation of grief." He almost smiled. Almost. She had diagrams? She always had diagrams? I didn't know that either. This time, Nori did not answer quickly. A gull moved over the far line of the lake, gray against gray, gone almost before Calder could be sure it had existed. "She stopped telling us some things," Nori said. "You because you turned every dream into a hazard assessment. Me because I was young, and she didn't want me carrying more than I had to." The words had no accusation in them. They were worse than accusation. They were carefully fair. Calder looked down at the cleared path. "I maintain the generator." "I know." "Didn't know why." "Maybe some part of you did." He shook his head. Nori did not push. That was new, or maybe it was old and he had never earned the chance to notice. Inside, Mavis had found Amos's ledger. She called them back with the triumphant shout of an archaeologist discovering a civilization under a pile of receipts. The ledger was green cloth, corners frayed, pages filled with Amos's cramped handwriting. Mavis laid it open and tapped a list written inside the back cover. 6 reels, she said. Winter voices, labeled by season and segment. Nori leaned over. "We have 5? "We have located 5, Mavis corrected. "Archive language is important. It leaves room for hope and incompetence." Calder read the entries. Reel 1, Lake Road closures. Reel 2, power outage interviews. Reel 3, the people who check in. Reel 4, Aurora Vale emergency plan. Reel 5, summer promise, winter use. Reel 6, spring ending, unfinished. "Spring ending," Nori said quietly. "Unfinished," Mavis reminded. Calder looked toward the sealed corridor beyond the booth. Mavis saw the look and raised one gloved finger. "No. I didn't say anything. You were preparing to become tiresome in a heroic direction." Nori closed the ledger gently. "Maybe we don't need to find it." Calder looked at her. She kept her hand on the cover. "Mom's last days don't have to become a scavenger hunt. Not everything unfinished is asking us to finish it." The sentence went through the room like a thread pulled through cloth. Mavis nodded once, approving but not interfering. Calder should have agreed. It was reasonable, respectful, safe. But reason had begun to feel like another closed door. Mara had stood on that small monitor with snow in her hair and a joke about electricity on her tongue. She had spoken of people needing a place in winter. She had written his name into the margins of a plan and never asked him to read it. Now there was a 6th reel, maybe ruined, maybe blank, maybe carrying nothing more than an old man's label and the ache of a project that never reached spring. Still, Calder felt the pull of it. Not like a clue, like a question. What had Mara meant to leave behind? And why had he been close enough to repair the generator, close enough to shovel the paths, close enough to sleep beside the ticket booth for years, but not close enough to know her dream had a name? Vesper wandered then toward the inner corridor. She did not scratch. She did not whine. She only sniffed along the base of the wall, paused near the old speaker wire, then lowered herself beside the door as if waiting for a familiar footstep that had been delayed by weather rather than death. Mavis watched her with softened eyes. "She isn't looking for film," the old archivist said. "She's looking for the sound of work." Nori closed her laptop. Calder looked at Vesper, then at the ledger, then at the dark windows where snow blurred the view of the screen. The old theater held its breath around them. Not because a secret had been found, because a voice had returned, and none of them yet knew how to answer it. By the last days of January, Aurora Vale had become a place divided against itself. On one side of the concession counter lay the living world. Inspection reports, purchase agreements, county notices, insurance estimates, emails from the winter tourism developers with subject lines polished smooth as river stones. Action required, revised offer, safety timeline, final review. On the other side lay the world that refused to be filed. Amos Lyle's brown coat, Vesper's medication schedule, Mavis Rorden's cotton gloves, the green ledger, labeled film cans resting in cold, stabilized boxes, and the few restored fragments of voices from winters that had passed through Coldwater Reach like wandering saints. Between them stood Calder Wainwright, who had spent most of his life believing that if he stood in the right place long enough, nothing behind him would be lost. The belief was proving unreliable. The concession building smelled of coffee, old paper, thawing wool, and the faint vinegar tang of aging film. Mavis had claimed the largest table as a battlefield of preservation. Nori had claimed the corner near the outlet, where her laptop, headphones, and cables formed a small nation of sound. Calder claimed nothing, which was his way of claiming everything. Vesper claimed the space between the old ticket booth door and Amos's coat. She no longer guarded the coat with the fierce desperation of the first night, but she always knew where it was. If someone moved it, her eyes followed. If a door closed too quickly, she rose, stiff-legged, and went to check whether she had been separated from something important. That morning, Norrie's phone rang while Calder was clearing ice from the threshold. She looked at the screen and hesitated. Calder noticed. He noticed most things except the ones people needed him to notice. "Who is it?" he asked. "My uncle." "Graham?" Norrie nodded. Graham Belrose had been a name spoken in their family the way one spoke of a dry climate or a distant tax office. Mara's older brother. Arizona. Practical. Good with money. Not good with the sentimental weather of Michigan. Norrie answered and put the call on speaker because the signal in the building was poor, not because she wanted witnesses. Graham's voice entered Aurora Vale, crisp and sun-baked, carrying none of the lake wind around its edges. "Norrie, I'll be direct. Has Calder signed anything?" Calder stopped scraping ice. Norrie glanced at him. "Not yet." A pause traveled across the line. "Of course." Calder straightened. "Good morning to you too, Graham." "Calder?" No warmth, no open hostility either. Just a door kept politely locked. "I didn't know you were there. I live here." "That," Graham said, "is part of the problem." Norrie closed her eyes briefly. Graham continued before either of them could answer. "Aurora Vale has eaten too much of this family. Money, time, labor, grief. My father thought it would save the town's summers. Mara thought it would save its winters. Amos thought it would save memory itself. Everyone kept feeding the place, and the place kept asking for more." Mavis across the room went very still. Calder felt anger rise because anger was loyal. It arrived fast, armed and eager to stand between him and whatever truth had just stepped into the room. "You sold your share," he said. "Yes, because I understood a leaking roof doesn't become sacred because someone loved it." Norrie said, "Graham." "No, let me say it. I love my sister. I know you did too. But love does not pay for structural work. Love does not renew insurance. Love does not repair wiring or preserve film stock or protect people if that building comes down in a storm." His voice softened then, but only slightly. "The dead should not make the living keep paying their bills." Vesper lifted her head. Perhaps it was Graham's voice through the speaker. Perhaps it was the tension tightening the room. She rose and went to Norrie, standing close to her knee without touching. Norrie's hand lowered automatically, resting near the dog's shoulder, but not quite on it. Calder wanted to argue. He wanted to call Graham a coward, a deserter of family memory, a man who fled to warm sand, and then lectured those left to shovel snow from the bones of what mattered. But the words would not form cleanly. Because a part of him, the cold and competent part that had kept him alive in other places, knew Graham was not wrong. Aurora Vale had become expensive ruin wrapped in myth. Every day Calder spent repairing one fault revealed 3 more. Every box of film Mavis saved would cost money to preserve properly. Every hour Norrie spent here was an hour stolen from her own life. The dead should not make the living keep paying their bills. The sentence was cruel. It was also practical, and practical things had always been the sharpest knives. After the call ended, Norrie did not look at Calder. She folded her phone into her palm and stared toward the covered cash register. "He's not trying to hurt us," she said. Calder scraped a bit of ice from the threshold with the toe of his boot. "That doesn't mean he isn't good at it." "He's scared we'll turn Mom into an excuse." "For what?" "For not choosing." That landed quietly, which made it harder to dodge. Before Calder could answer, Mavis cleared her throat from the film table. "I have something," she said. There was no triumph in her voice this time. Only reluctance. The letters had been tucked into the back of Amos's ledger, folded inside a brittle envelope, addressed to Dr. M. Rorden, and never mailed. Mavis handled them with the care of a priest lifting ashes. "I knew Amos and I disagreed," she said. "I did not know he wrote this much instead of apologizing. Men of that generation could build a barn, fix a projector, survive a blizzard, and then be defeated by an envelope." Calder almost said something, did not. Mavis put on her glasses, then removed them, then chose the pair from her pocket instead, as if the correct sorrow required the correct lens. The first letter was to her. Amos's handwriting was cramped, uneven in places, but still readable. He admitted he had been wrong to keep the reels at Aurora Vale after the building began failing. He wrote that Mavis had been right about temperature, humidity, risk, proper storage. Mavis read that part with a slight sniff. Then her voice slowed. He says he was afraid that if the film went to Lansing or Marquette, it would become a catalog number. Clean, safe, forgotten by the people who made it. He wanted the town to watch itself, not researchers, not a committee. The town. Norrie leaned against the counter. Mavis continued reading silently for a moment, then stopped at a second letter folded behind the first. This one mentions Mara. Calder's hand closed around the cracked mica star on his key ring. Mavis looked at him. "Do you want me to read it aloud?" "No," Calder thought. "Yes?" he said. Mavis took a breath. Amos had written of Mara's last winter at Aurora Vale. Not her final winter alive, but the last winter she worked on the project with any real force. She had drawn up papers to transfer daily management of the drive-in to a community trust once the film was complete. She wanted the warming station governed by people who would use it, not by family loyalties or old arguments. Then came the line that changed the room. Mara was planning to leave Michigan after the spring reel. Mavis stopped reading. Norrie's face went pale in a way Calder had only seen once before, in a hospital hallway with vending machine light on the floor. Calder said, "Leave where?" Mavis looked back at the page. Amos doesn't say, only that she had begun contacting friends outside the state. He wrote that she loved Aurora Vale, but she no longer wanted it to be a rope, tying her to a man who had not decided whether he was still among the living. The words did not strike Calder loudly. They struck like deep water. No splash, no drama. Just the sudden knowledge that the bottom had vanished beneath his feet. He had known the marriage ended. Of course he had known. Papers had been signed, rooms divided, calls shortened, Norrie's visits measured. Mara's voice had grown kinder to strangers than to him, not because she loved them more, but because she expected less from them. But some foolish, stubborn shrine inside Calder had preserved another belief, that Mara kept Aurora Vale partly because of him, because he was here, because some small unspoken chord still remained between the old screen, the generator, the ticket booth, and whatever love had once survived their worst years. Now Amos's letter opened that belief and emptied it. Mara had not been waiting for him to understand. She had been preparing to live without waiting. Vesper walked to the door then. Not the outside door. The inner door, the one leading toward the sealed corridor and the projection building beyond. She stood before it, breathing fast, her eyes fixed on the narrow, dark seam between wood and frame. Norrie noticed first. "Vesper?" The dog did not respond. Calder looked at the door. It was closed, but not locked. Vesper could smell Amos's coat behind her, hear the people in the room, feel the warmth of the heater. Still she stared at the seam as though all of history had narrowed into that inch of darkness. Mavis folded the letter. "I think that's enough for today," she said. No one argued. By evening, the others had gone or retreated into their separate corners. Mavis returned to her motel with the letters sealed in an archival sleeve. Norrie drove into town to pick up medication for Vesper and groceries no one admitted needing. Snow began again, soft and thin, brushing the windows as if testing whether Aurora Vale still had a pulse. Calder remained in the ticket booth. He took the bottle from the lower cabinet, not because he wanted it, but because he knew exactly where it was and hated that he knew. It had been Mara's bourbon, not expensive, not ceremonial. She used to pour a small glass on the first truly cold night of each winter and say she was negotiating with the season. The bottle had sat unopened since her passing. Calder set it on the counter. For 10 minutes he did nothing. Then he poured one finger into a chipped glass. The amber liquid caught the lamplight and held it there. He thought of Mara's handwriting in the margins. Calder will hate folding cots. Let him hate useful things. He thought of Graham's voice. The dead should not make the living keep paying their bills. He thought of Amos writing letters he never mailed. He thought of Norrie as a child standing outside his closed workshop door, asking if he was busy, and himself answering, "Give me a minute," as though fatherhood were a task that could safely wait. The minute had become years. The bourbon smelled of oak and winter. He lifted the glass but did not drink. A sound came from the doorway. Vesper stood just outside the booth, in the short hall between rooms. Calder had left the door partly open, no wider than his boot. The old shepherd stared at the gap. Her body had gone rigid. Her breathing came fast, shallow. "Vesper?" Calder said. She did not look at him. Her eyes stayed on the space between the door and the frame. Calder understood then with a clarity that made him ashamed of how long it had taken. The dog was not afraid of the booth. She was not afraid of him. She was not even simply guarding Amos's coat. She was afraid of being on the wrong side when the door decided what world she belonged to. How many times had Amos left for the hospital? How many times had June closed a garage door? How many rooms had changed their smell while Vesper waited outside, certain the person she loved would come back if she kept watch properly? Calder looked at the glass in his hand. He had lived much the same way. Outside doors, inside doors, mission doors, hospital doors, bedroom doors. Every one of them closed for good while he stood nearby, telling himself he had followed procedure. Slowly, he set the bourbon down. He crossed the room and opened the door all the way. Not with a command, not with his hand out, not with that old voice that could move men across dangerous ground. He opened it and stepped back. Vesper stood still. The hallway light made a silver edge along her graying muzzle. Snow hissed softly against the window beyond her. For a long time, she did not move at all. Calder waited. The waiting hurt more than action. At last, Vesper took one step inside, then another. She entered the booth, sniffed Amos's coat, where it lay folded near the heater, and did something she hadn't done since Calder found her. She did not lie on it. Instead, she circled once and lowered herself beside Calder's boots, close enough that her shoulder brushed the cuff of his jeans. Her head sank onto her paws. She sighed like an old bellows settling after a fire. Calder stood above her, unable to move. It was not forgiveness. Dogs did not hand out holy verdicts to men because men wanted symbols. It was not a miracle. It did not erase Amos, Mara, Ian, Norrie, or all the doors Calder had failed to open in time. It was only a choice. A tired, trembling, living creature had been given room to decide, and she had come in. Calder picked up the glass of bourbon. He carried it to the small sink and poured it out. The liquid ran in a thin amber line, vanished with a quiet sound, and left behind only the smell. He washed the glass. Then he sat on the floor beside Vesper, not touching her at first. After a while, she shifted closer until her back rested against his leg. He left the door open. In the morning, Norrie found him at the concession table with the purchase agreement, the inspection report, Mara's notebook, and Amos's letters arranged in 4 careful stacks. Vesper slept under the table, not on the coat. The coat lay folded on a chair nearby. Norrie stopped in the doorway, holding 2 paper cups of coffee from town. "You sleep?" she asked. "Some." "That means no." "It means some." She placed a cup beside him. Calder looked older in the morning light, but not weaker. There was a strange, raw steadiness to him, like a tree after ice has broken from its branches. "I don't know if we should keep it," he said. Nori leaned against the counter. She did not interrupt, and that small mercy seemed to cost her something. "I don't know if this place can be saved. I don't know if it should be. Graham's not wrong about the money. Tamsin's not wrong about the structure. You're not wrong about needing an end to things." Nori watched him carefully. Calder touched the edge of Mara's notebook. "But I'm not signing because I'm afraid to hear the rest of her story." The sentence entered the room quietly. It did not fix the roof. It did not pay the debt. It did not call Mara back or heal Nori's childhood. It was not enough, but it was not nothing. Nori looked down at Vesper beneath the table. The old dog opened one eye, then closed it again, apparently satisfied that no one had closed the important door. Nori's face softened. She did not hug Calder. The Wainwrights were not a family that vaulted over pain simply because a morning offered good lighting. She only nodded. Once, small, careful, real. For their family, that nod was like the first flame in a cold stove. Not a blaze, not salvation, but a beginning brave enough to make the room less dark. Outside, Aurora Vale lay beneath new snow, half ruin and half promise. The great white screen faced the lake, waiting for whatever came next. February came to Coldwater Reach with a blue sky so bright it looked almost merciless. Lake Superior had begun to freeze in plates near the shore, not smooth enough to trust, not broken enough to ignore. Wind moved over those pale shelves of ice and climbed the slope toward Aurora Vale, threading itself through the old speaker posts until the whole lot gave off a thin, wavering sound. Calder once told Nori it was just air passing through hollow metal. Mavis, overhearing, said the speaker posts sounded like an elderly choir trying to remember the tune. Nori said both descriptions were probably accurate. Vesper preferred neither. She simply stood with her nose lifted to the cold and listened as though somewhere beyond the lake wind, Amos might still be adjusting the volume. The days after Graham's call and Amos's letters had settled into a strange kind of truce. Nothing was solved. The purchase agreement still waited in its folder. Tamsin's restrictions remained taped to the wall. The film reels sat packed and labeled, their future dependent on money no one had yet found. Nori spent part of each morning answering emails from Milwaukee, part of each afternoon sorting Mara's audio notes, and part of each evening pretending not to watch Calder for signs that he might retreat back behind his old doors. Calder did not retreat. Not entirely. He still rose before dawn, still shoveled, still tested the generator, still wrote each fault in his maintenance notebook with the grim tenderness of a monk copying scripture. But he had begun adding a second page to his checks. Concession building, south exit clear, blanket bins, dry, propane line, inspected, radio battery, charged, occupancy limit, pending Tamsin approval. He did not call it Mara's plan. He did not call it hope, either. He just wrote it down. That evening, the weather shifted in a way only people who lived near the lake could feel before any alert arrived. The cold sharpened. The sky kept its clear face too long. The wind went quiet for nearly 20 minutes, and the quiet felt less like peace than an animal drawing breath. By 8, snow began. By 9, the county alert system sent out a warning. By 10, the road to the main warming center was blocked by a fallen stand of birch trees north of the old mill. At 10:30, the lights in the concession building flickered once, steadied, then died. The generator did not start automatically. Calder was already moving. Nori came out of the back office with a headlamp in one hand, her headphones around her neck. Mavis appeared from behind a shelf holding a flashlight and a bag of marshmallows. "For morale," she said. "For emergency calories?" Nori asked. "For morale," Mavis repeated. "Civilization fails when people stop respecting marshmallows." Vesper lifted her head from Amos's coat, ears angled toward the storm. Outside, snow flew past the windows in long white cords. Calder crossed to the breaker panel, then stopped when his phone rang. Ellis Boone. Calder answered. Ellis's voice came through, under static and wind. "You still have the concession building usable?" "Power's out. Generator not engaged yet." "Can you get it running?" "Yes." Don't answer like a man trying to impress a ghost. Answer like someone who read Tamsen's report. Calder looked at the posted occupancy limits on the wall. "If the generator runs, concession building only, no projection building. South and west exits clear, limited numbers." A pause. Then Ellis said, quieter, "Good. I've got 8 adults stranded on Lake Road. 2 truck drivers, a nurse coming off shift, 3 county road crew, and the Mayhews. Main center is cut off. I can get them to you before the drifts close the lower turn." Aurora Vale had never been approved as an official shelter. It was an old drive-in with a wounded roof, an uncertain future, and a man inside who had spent years confusing control with care. Ellis did not order him. That mattered. "Bring them," Calder said. Then he added, before the old instinct could swallow the words, "I'll call Tamsen." Norrie looked up sharply. Calder called. Tamsen Greer answered as if she had been waiting for someone to make a bad decision and wanted to be present when it happened. "No upper building," she said before Calder finished the first sentence. "No upper building. Concession only, no more than 12 inside. Keep the east storage wall clear. Monitor ventilation. If you smell exhaust, everyone leaves." "Understood." "Say the last part again." "If exhaust is detected, everyone leaves." "Good. I hate preventable headlines." Calder nearly smiled. "So do I." "No, you hate feeling unnecessary. Different condition." The line clicked dead. For a moment, Calder stood with the phone in his hand, looking at the taped report on the wall. Once he would have heard her caution as an insult. Once he would have moved faster to prove he could do what others doubted. Now he folded the phone into his pocket and turned to Norrie. "Set up the radio and speaker line. Keep it inside the concession zone. Mavis, blankets, and hot water, if we get heat back. Vesper stays away from the generator shed." Vesper gave him a look that suggested she found his command incomplete and his rank questionable. Mavis pointed at the dog. "She outranks you in this building. She has arthritis. She has wisdom, common confusion among men." Calder pulled on his canvas coat and went into the storm. The generator shed stood 20 yards from the concession building. In daylight, it was an ugly little box. At night, in a blizzard, it became a trial set by some minor winter god with poor manners. Snow hit Calder's face hard enough to sting. He kept one gloved hand on the guide rope he had strung weeks before from the concession door to the shed, another habit that had once seemed like over-preparation and now felt like Mara's ghost laughing politely. The generator coughed when he primed it, then nothing. He checked the fuel, adequate, battery, alive, air intake, blocked by ice. He cleared it with a scraper, then tried again. The engine turned, caught, then shuddered low and uneven. The auxiliary fuel valve was stiff from the cold. Calder's first impulse was to force it. He stopped. Machinery did not respond well to pride, people even less. He warmed the line with a portable heat wrap from the shed kit, waited 30 seconds longer than he wanted, and tried again. The valve moved. The generator roared to life. Light returned to the concession building in a flicker, then a steady glow. Through the frosted window, Calder saw Norrie at the radio table, one hand on her headset, the other adjusting levels. Mavis was already dragging blanket bins with the tragic dignity of someone forced into usefulness. Vesper stood behind the glass, watching Calder until he came back inside. The first vehicle arrived at 11:15. Ellis drove ahead, hazard lights pulsing red through the snow. Behind him came a county truck with 3 road crew members in reflective coats packed shoulder to shoulder, followed by a semi-cab without its trailer and an old sedan moving carefully, as though one harsh gust could convince it to retire forever. They came in with snow on their shoulders, breath white, faces drawn by cold and worry. Not a crowd, not a dramatic rescue. Just people who had reached the end of a bad road and found unexpectedly that the dead drive-in still had a door open. Ellis took command of the entrance with calm efficiency. Names recorded, number inside counted. Wet gloves placed near the heater, not on it. Exits checked. No one near the sealed corridor. He nodded once at Calder, not gratitude exactly, but trust given on a short leash. The stranded group settled slowly. One of the truck drivers, a broad man named Rudy Ellis, kept calling, "Not my cousin, don't start," tried 3 times to reach his wife and got nothing but failed signal. A nurse named Hannah Vale sat near the wall, eyes open and unfocused, her hands shaking from exhaustion as much as cold. The Mayhews, an elderly couple dressed in matching navy parkas, apologized to everyone they passed, as if survival were a social inconvenience. The 3 road crew workers took turns pretending they were not relieved. Norrie got the emergency radio working through the old speaker system. Her voice, steady and low, filled the concession room without echo. Coldwater Reach Volunteer Fire has 8 adults accounted for at Aurora Vale. Concession building only. Generator running. No medical emergency at this time. Calder looked up at the old speakers mounted in the corners. For years, the system had been dead except for static. Now his daughter's voice moved through it like a lamp being carried room to room. Mara's diagrams had not been sentimental. They had been waiting. Hot water came next. Then soup from cans Calder had rotated monthly because expiration dates offended him. Mavis handed out blankets from Amos's old bins and announced, "1 per person unless you are married, elderly, or visibly pathetic." Mr. Mayhew raised a hand. "How visibly?" "Sir, you are wearing loafers in a lake storm. Take 2. A tired laugh moved through the room, small but real. Vesper remained on Amos's coat near the entrance at first, watching everyone with grave suspicion. Too many boots, too many unfamiliar smells, too much movement. Calder kept an eye on her while pretending he was checking the ventilation gauge. Rudy, the truck driver, stood near the window with his phone raised. No signal. He lowered it, tried again, then again. Each failure tightened his shoulders. His breath began coming too fast. "My wife's alone tonight," he said to no one in particular. "She hates storms. She'll think—" His voice caught. He pressed a hand flat against his chest, not dramatically, just like a man trying to hold himself together with his palm. Calder moved 1 step, then stopped. Before him, Vesper had risen. The old dog crossed the room slowly, joints stiff, nails clicking over the floorboards. She did not rush to save anyone. She did not perform. She simply placed herself beside Rudy's leg and leaned her warm, living weight against him. Rudy looked down. "Oh," he whispered, as if the dog had answered a question he hadn't known how to ask. His hand lowered to Vesper's neck. His fingers sank into the thick gold and black fur. The rhythm of his breathing changed, not instantly, not like a switch, more like waves calming after wind begins to pass. Norrie watched from the radio table. Calder watched from beside the heater. Mavis came up near him and folded her arms. "Amos called her the ticket-taker of souls," she murmured. Calder glanced at her. "That is terrible." "It is magnificent." "It is too much." Mavis looked pointedly around the room. The blizzard, the abandoned drive-in, the ex-SEAL in a green T-shirt, the old dog comforting a truck driver under a dead movie screen. "Calder, you sleep in a ticket booth and brood under a giant white screen. You lost the right to criticize poetry several winters ago." Despite himself, Calder huffed once. It was not quite a laugh. Mavis accepted it as tribute. The night stretched long. The storm pressed against the walls. The generator kept its rough, faithful rhythm. Norrie relayed updates. Ellis checked outside twice and came back crusted in snow. Calder monitored the fuel level, heat, ventilation, exits, occupancy, all the practical threads that kept the night from unraveling. But he did not hold every thread alone. That was the difference. When Hannah the nurse began nodding off in her chair, Norrie brought her a blanket. When Mrs. Mayhew worried about her medication schedule, Mavis found a pen and helped write it down. When one of the road crew workers noticed a draft near the west exit, Ellis handed him tape and made him useful. Aurora Vale, for one night, became less a ruin than a lantern, patched, imperfect, ridiculous, and bright enough. Near dawn, the wind eased. County crews cleared the blocked road by morning. One by one, the stranded adults left, thanking everyone in the awkward, sincere way people do after needing more help than pride wanted to accept. Rudy crouched with effort to pat Vesper one last time. "Tell your boss thanks," he said. Vesper sneezed. "She says you're welcome," Mavis translated. By 8, only the regulars remained. Calder, Norrie, Mavis, Ellis, and the old German shepherd who had returned to Amos's coat, but now lay beside it rather than on it. Sunlight came out suddenly, bright enough to make the fresh snow burn white. Then the sound came, a deep, heavy crack from the sealed projection building. Everyone froze. Another sound followed, not an explosion, not chaos, but the tired surrender of old wood shifting under ice. Calder and Ellis were already moving to the window. Across the lot, part of the upper projection roof had slumped inward behind the marked restricted zone. Snow and broken shingles slid down one side. A thin spray of powder lifted, then settled. No one had been near it. Tamsin's orange marks stood out on the lower wall like warnings from a stern prophet. Ellis exhaled. "Well, that's going to improve her mood." Calder said nothing. He was looking lower. A dark line of meltwater had begun to trail from the damaged section toward the old storage wall. The east storage area. The place Mavis had not fully cleared. The place where Amos's ledger suggested unaccounted material might still be stored. The possible location of the spring reel. Mavis came up behind them, face gone pale. "If water gets into the lower cabinets—" "I know," Calder said. His body had already chosen a plan before the sentence finished. Cross the lot. Open the lower access. Get in before the thaw spread. Move fast. Accept the risk. Better him than anyone else. That old arithmetic rose in him clean and terrible. One man against danger. One man deciding. One man paying the price, so no one else had to argue. He reached for his coat. Vesper stood in front of the door. She did not bark. She did not growl. She did not block him with force. She simply placed herself between Calder and the storm, her graying muzzle lifted, her amber eyes steady. For a moment, all he saw was a dog. Then he saw the choice. Vesper had left Amos's coat the night before to calm a living man. She had stepped through an open door because Calder had not commanded her. She had trusted the room because the room had waited. Now she stood before him like an old guardian of a wiser law. Loyalty was not always running into the dangerous place. Sometimes loyalty was stopping at the threshold long enough to let others help. Calder took his hand off the coat. Norrie watched him from the radio table, completely still. Ellis said nothing. Mavis pressed both gloved hands over her mouth. Calder pulled out his phone. He looked at the damaged roof, then at the dog, then at the inspection report, still taped to the wall. When Tamsin answered, he said, "The upper projection roof shifted. No injuries. Water may threaten lower storage. I'm not entering until you tell us how to do it safely." There was a pause on the line. Then Tamsin said, "That may be the first beautiful sentence you've ever spoken." Calder looked down at Vesper. The old dog blinked once, unimpressed by beauty, and leaned against his leg. Tamsin Greer arrived at Aurora Vale before the sun had fully decided what kind of morning it wanted to be. Her county truck rolled through the snow with its amber light turning slow circles over the empty lot. Behind her came Ellis Boone in the fire pickup, then Dr. Corinne Halstead in her mud-spattered veterinary truck because someone had called her about Vesper, and Corinne had apparently decided that whenever men, broken roofs, and old dogs gathered in one place, supervision was not optional. Tamsin stepped out wearing her white hard hat, gray-blue technical jacket, and the expression of a woman who had no spare affection for foolish bravery. She looked once at the slumped upper projection roof, once at Calder, and lifted one gloved finger. "No one enters the collapse zone." Calder said, "I know." "No one," she repeated. Not a former SEAL, not a volunteer fire captain, not an archivist carrying 3 pairs of glasses like holy relics, not a German shepherd with seniority. Mavis, who had just climbed out of Norrie's car holding a padded film case, looked offended. "They are not relics, they are my navigational system." "They can navigate from outside," Tamsin said. Ellis coughed into his glove, perhaps to hide a laugh. Calder did not smile, but one corner of his mouth betrayed him. Vesper stood beside his left leg, her graying muzzle lifted toward the damaged building. Snow dusted the black saddle of her back and gathered delicately along her golden ruff. Her left ear, with its softened tip, tilted toward the old projection house, as if listening for Amos beneath the groan of stressed wood. A thin line of meltwater had frozen overnight along the east storage wall. The damaged roof had not collapsed completely, but part of it had shifted inward, pressing weight onto beams Tamsin had already marked as unreliable. The lower storage area might be reachable from outside. It might also be full of splintered boards, wet insulation, and bad decisions waiting to happen. Calder knew how to move through damaged structures. He knew how to assess load by sound, how to keep weight distributed, how to get in and out fast. That was exactly why Tamsin refused to let him near the door. "People with skills," she said, reading his face with insulting accuracy, "are especially dangerous around unstable structures. They trust themselves right up until physics files a complaint." Ellis nodded solemnly. "Physics is famous for paperwork?" Norrie stood near the concession door with her laptop bag over one shoulder and a small inspection camera kit in the other hand. She did not say anything, but her eyes found Calder's and held them. There was no challenge in the look. That made it harder. If she had accused him of wanting to rush in, he could have defended himself. If she had pleaded, he could have hidden behind procedure. Instead, she simply watched to see whether the man who had said he would not sign out of fear could also resist acting out of fear. Calder looked at the damaged roof, then at Vesper, then at Tamsin. "What's the plan?" he asked. The words tasted like surrender. They also tasted, strangely, like relief. Tamsin unrolled a laminated structural sketch on the hood of her truck. "We do not use the interior corridor. We do not open the east storage door. We do not disturb the upper framing. We access through the exterior west wall of the lower storage room, here." She tapped the plan with her orange marker. "That section doesn't carry the shifted roof load. Ellis and I will brace the lower opening before anything moves." Norrie runs the camera through first. Mavis identifies anything film-related. "Calder, you handle tools and materials from the safe line." Calder stared at the plan. "Safe line?" he repeated. Tamsin looked up. "Yes, it's the line you do not cross." "I know what a safe line is." "Excellent. Today you get to obey one." Corinne came up beside Vesper and clipped a leash gently to the dog's old leather collar. The metal tag, shaped like a film reel, glinted against her chest. "And Vesper stays with me," Corinne said. "No elderly shepherd needs to stand in the middle of a construction recovery because elderly men enjoy making mythology out of back pain." Mavis pointed at Calder. "She means you." I understood. "Understanding is the larval stage of improvement," Mavis said. Norrie gave a quiet laugh. It moved through the cold morning like the first small bell of thaw. They worked slowly. That was the hardest part. Ellis cleared snow from the west wall and set temporary braces under Tamsin's direction. Tamsin measured, marked, and remeasured, never rushing, never letting anyone's urgency become a tool in the room. Calder handed over timber, clamps, screws, the battery saw, the extension line. He could feel in his shoulders the old hunger to step past the line and make the work faster. Each time, Vesper looked at him. Not dramatically, not as if she understood engineering. Just looked. That was enough. When Ellis began cutting the small access opening, the sound of the saw traveled across the empty lot and struck the white screen. The old drive-in seemed to listen to its own body being opened. Mavis stood with her gloved hands clasped, muttering prayers that were mostly technical terms. Please be dry, please be labeled, please do not smell like vinegar, and regret. Is regret a common archival condition? Norrie asked. Very. At last, Ellis removed the cut section of wall. Cold air spilled out, carrying the scent of wet wood, dust, old blankets, and machine oil. Tamsin crouched, shined a light through the opening, and studied the interior without entering. No one reaches in until we see what's above. Norrie opened the small camera kit. It was a flexible inspection camera she had used in recording studios to trace cables behind walls. Now its tiny light moved into the dark storage room like a mechanical firefly. The image appeared on her laptop screen. Everyone leaned close, except Vesper, who sat beside Corinne and watched the human circle with grave doubt. The camera showed shelves, a fallen piece of ceiling, a cabinet with swollen doors, a stack of old speaker housings, plastic bins, a metal rack of projector parts. Water dripped somewhere out of view with the steady patience of a clock. Left, Mavis said. Slowly? Norrie guided the camera. There, Mavis said. That gray cabinet. Film cans, maybe. Wet, Norrie said. Not all wet? Move right. The camera turned. Vesper rose suddenly. Corinne tightened the leash just enough to remind, not restrain. Easy, girl. The shepherd was not looking at the laptop. She was looking through the opening in the wall, nostrils moving. Calder followed her gaze. Inside the storage room, partly hidden behind a collapsed shelf, sat a green canvas trunk, stenciled with faded white letters. Aurora Vale, emergency blankets. Vesper gave one low sound, not quite a whine. Mavis looked from the dog to the screen. That trunk belonged to Amos. Calder felt the old instinct try to turn the moment into a revelation. The dog found it. The dog knew. The dog led them to the secret. But that was not what was happening. Vesper did not know about film labels or missing reels. She knew cloth, oil, Amos's hands, the old scent map of a life where the projector ran and someone came back through the door at the end of the night. She smells him, Calder said. Corinne nodded. Probably. The truth made the moment smaller. It also made it more sacred. Tamsin assessed the shelf above the trunk. Ellis adjusted the brace and used a long-handled hook to shift debris away. Calder stood behind the safe line with both hands empty because Tamsin had taken the hook from him after one look at his face. Tool privilege revoked, she said. I didn't do anything. You were considering doing something. Norrie guided the camera while Ellis worked. Mavis identified what to avoid. Tamsin watched the frame and the structure at the same time. It took nearly 40 minutes to move the canvas trunk close enough to the opening. 40 minutes Calder would have once tried to compress into 4. When the trunk finally slid out onto the snow, everyone stood around it as if it were an animal rescued from the ice. The latch resisted. Ellis loosened it with a screwdriver. Mavis put on fresh gloves. Norrie crouched beside her. Vesper leaned forward until Corinne's hand rested against her chest. Inside lay folded wool blankets, stiff with cold but dry. Mavis lifted the first layer, then the second. Beneath them rested a roll wrapped in wax paper and tied with cotton string. Not a metal can, not a dramatic box, just a careful bundle placed where temperature stayed steadier than the cabinets near the wall. Mavis exhaled. "Amos, you stubborn, sentimental old barnacle." The label was written in his hand. "Spring ending, not final. Do not project." Norrie read it aloud, and the words settled over them more gently than anyone expected. Not final. Do not project. Calder stared at the bundle. Amos had not hidden it like treasure. He had protected it like something too unfinished to face and too loved to throw away. He had placed it among blankets, the very objects Mara wanted ready for strangers in winter. Mavis pressed the wrapped reel to her chest for 1 second, then seemed embarrassed by her own tenderness and handed it to Norrie. "This goes to Marquette today." "Today?" Calder asked. "Today, before anyone romanticizes it into staying here longer." He did not argue. That, more than anything, surprised him. The weeks that followed did not move like a movie. They moved like paperwork, thaw, waiting, and small changes nobody applauded. Mavis sent the reel to the restoration lab with 3 emails, 2 phone calls, and 1 threat involving professional shame. Norrie went with her to Marquette to assist with audio transfer once the material was stabilized. Calder stayed at Aurora Vale with Vesper, who spent the first 2 days searching the concession building for Norrie's voice, and then, with visible disappointment, accepted Calder as the available staff. The snowbanks softened at their edges. The damaged projection building remained sealed. Tamsin sent a list of conditions required before any future public use. Ellis sent a list of emergency supplies. Corinne sent Vesper's updated medication schedule with the words "No heroic stairs" written in red at the top. Calder taped all 3 lists to the wall. Then he began making his own. Permit categories, insurance requirements, generator replacement estimate, propane inspection, radio license, exit lighting, heating zones, volunteer training, Vesper winter care, heated bed, ramp, medication, paw balm, June visitation. He wrote the last item twice because it did not fit neatly under any other heading. For the first time in years, his notebook contained more future tense than damage report. June came on a Sunday with a paper bag of soft treats and a face braced for heartbreak. Vesper saw her through the window and tried to run. Her body betrayed the intention halfway across the room. Stiffness slowed her, and Calder opened the door wider so she would not have to turn sharply. June dropped to her knees in the snow anyway, laughing and crying as the shepherd pressed into her arms. "There's my girl," June whispered. "There's my stubborn old lady." Calder stood back. He had learned something about doors. He had learned less about letting go, but he suspected the 2 lessons were related. June stayed for an hour. She inspected Vesper's bed, medication, food, the ramp Calder had built from the booth step to the snowpath. Corinne had clearly briefed her because June asked questions with a nurse's precision and a niece's fear. "You're giving the anti-inflammatory with food?" "Yes." "No stairs?" "No stairs." "Paw balm after outdoor time?" "Yes." "Pictures?" Calder hesitated. June looked up. "I don't take many pictures," he said. "You used to jump out of aircraft, according to Amos. Different skill set. You can survive a phone camera." Vesper, standing between them, wagged once as if voting in favor of photographic accountability. When June prepared to leave, she clipped the leash to Vesper's collar out of habit. Then she stopped. Vesper looked at the leash, then at June, then at Calder. No one spoke. Snow fell in loose flakes, the kind that drifted more than descended. Calder felt the old urge to solve the moment. Tell the dog to stay. Tell June it was better this way. Tell himself choice was clean when named properly. He did none of it. June loosened her grip. Calder kept his hands at his sides. Vesper stood between them for a long time. Her amber eyes moved from one face to the other. At last she stepped toward Calder, pressed her shoulder against his leg, then turned her head back to June. June closed her eyes. "All right," she said, voice trembling. "All right, girl." The paperwork was not ceremonial. It was 3 forms, a vaccination record, and a transfer of care agreement signed on the concession counter beside a tin of paw balm. June added conditions in neat handwriting: arthritis treatment, safe housing, monthly updates, visits allowed. Calder signed. June removed a small keychain from her pocket, a tiny metal projector Amos had carried for years, and placed it beside his hand. "He'd want her where she can sleep," she said. Calder looked at the keychain, then at Vesper, who had lowered herself beneath the counter as if all legal matters bored her. "I'll send pictures," he said. June smiled through tears. "Look at that. Growth." The call from Marquette came 2 weeks later. They gathered not at Aurora Vale, but in a small meeting room at the Coldwater Reach Library, because Mavis refused to let anyone view the digital transfer for the first time in a building that had recently tried to eat its own roof. The room had beige walls, a coffee urn, 12 stackable chairs, and a projector that hummed with bureaucratic humility. Norrie connected her laptop. Mavis sat upright as if attending a premiere at an opera house. Calder sat with Vesper beside him, one hand resting lightly on the dog's neck. June came too, sitting near the back. Corinne arrived late and claimed she was only there to monitor Vesper, though she accepted coffee immediately. The screen lit. Mara appeared. Not as a saint. Not as a memory polished by grief until it no longer resembled a person. She stood in the snowy lot wearing a thick coat, a crooked knit hat, and gloves that did not match. Her cheeks were red from cold. Wind pushed hair across her mouth, and she kept brushing it away with irritation so familiar that Norrie made a soft sound beside Calder. Mara looked tired, alive, real. "This is the part I keep failing to write," she said to the camera, "which probably means it's the part I should stop writing alone." Behind the camera, Amos said, "That sounds expensive." Mara laughed. "Everything worth doing in this building is expensive." The room gave a small ripple of laughter, then quieted. On screen, Mara turned slowly, taking in Aurora Vale behind her. The screen, the speaker posts, the concession stand, the snowy rows where no cars waited. "I don't want this place to become a shrine," she said. "Not to my father, not to me, not to Amos, though he will absolutely haunt the projector if given the opportunity." Amos grumbled something indistinct. Mara smiled, then grew serious. "If Aurora Vale stays alive, it cannot stay alive because people are afraid to let go. It has to be useful. It has to be warm. It has to be a place where someone can come in from a storm, hear another human voice, and remember they have not been misplaced by the world." Calder felt Vesper shift beside him. Mara looked down at her notes, then folded them. "I used to think endings were something you had to earn by doing everything right," she said. "But maybe some stories are not supposed to end with one person saying the perfect thing. Maybe they end when the next person knows where to begin." She turned her head toward the camera. "Amos, what should the ending be?" Wind filled the microphone. Then Amos answered, his voice rough and gentle behind the lens. "Let spring film the rest." Mara laughed softly. The image held for 2 more seconds. Then the screen went black. No hidden message, no perfect forgiveness, no last sentence addressed to Calder, no secret instruction for Norrie. Only an unfinished ending that had never pretended to be anything else. The room stayed silent. Mavis removed her glasses and pressed them to her chest. June wiped her face. Corinne looked at the ceiling with suspicious intensity. Norrie sat very still, both hands folded around her headphones. Calder felt something break open in him, but not violently. It was more like ice loosening on the lake, a deep internal shift. Quiet, dangerous, necessary. He began to laugh, not loudly, not happily. A small, helpless sound at the absurd mercy of it all. He had waited for judgment, for some message that would condemn him cleanly or absolve him enough to know what to do. Mara had left neither. She had left work, warmth, a question, room for spring. The laugh folded into tears before he could stop it. He bowed his head. Vesper rose enough to place her muzzle on his knee. She did not need a projector's hum. She did not need Amos's coat. She only stayed. Calder put his hand over her head and let the room witness him without command, without usefulness, without a door between himself and grief. For once, no one tried to rescue him from it. And for once, Calder did not try to rescue himself too quickly. A year passed before Aurora Vale lit up again. Not one of those storybook years that flew by on a single golden leaf and returned carrying miracles in its pockets. It was a working year. A year of permits, cost estimates, frozen fingers, delayed deliveries, grant applications, county meetings, revised drawings, and men in muddy boots standing beneath an old roof saying things like, "Well, that's worse than I hoped," while Tamsin Greer marked another beam with orange paint. The upper projection room came down in March under controlled demolition. Calder stood behind the safe line and watched the last high window disappear into a careful fall of timber and dust. He did not look away. He had learned by then that letting something end with dignity required as much discipline as holding it up. The old screen remained. Tamsin declared it structurally salvageable after reinforcement, though she said it with the grim expression of someone granting a pardon to a very large, very stubborn patient. The white surface was cleaned, but not made perfect. Some weather stains remained. A long scar near the lower left corner stayed visible if the light hit it right. Mavis called it character. Tamsin called it documented surface irregularity. Norrie called it honest. The concession building changed slowly. New insulation went into the walls. A safer stove replaced the old propane setup. A modern generator sat in a weatherproof shed beside Calder's carefully maintained older unit, which Mavis insisted should receive an honorary retirement ceremony. A radio desk occupied one corner. Blanket bins lined the wall, labeled in Mavis's handwriting because no one else's labels were, in her words, spiritually legible. Above the south exit hung a sign designed by Norrie. Aurora Vale, warming station open during severe winter events. Check in, warm up, listen for updates. Calder read it every morning. He still rose before dawn, still checked locks twice, still wrote in his maintenance notebook. He did not become an easy man, or a talkative one, or one of those late-life saints who suddenly knew what to say under every tender circumstance. His silences remained. His shoulders still stiffened when someone surprised him from behind. His first answer to almost any new idea was still a practical objection. But the objections changed. They were no longer walls. They became questions with doors in them. How many people can we seat safely? Who checks the radio if Ellis is on a call? What's the backup heat source? Does Norrie need a better cable run for outdoor sound? The first Sunday he called Norrie. It was to ask about speaker impedance. She answered from Milwaukee and said, "Hello to you too, Dad." He almost hung up from embarrassment. Instead, he said, "Hello." It was a small word, but in the Wainwright family, small words often had to carry packs like mountain mules. The calls continued. At first, he asked technical questions, then weather questions. Had Milwaukee gotten lake-effect snow? Was the studio keeping her too late? Did she still have that wool hat Mara once mailed her? The first time he asked, "Are you tired?" The line went quiet so long he checked the signal. "I'm okay," Norrie said finally. He did not know what to do with the relief that followed, so he said, "Good." Norrie laughed softly. "We'll build from there." Vesper aged through that year with the slow nobility of an old ship staying afloat through careful repairs. Corinne adjusted her arthritis medication. Calder laid anti-slip rugs across the ticket booth and built a low ramp over the back step. June mailed soft toys that Vesper inspected gravely, then carried to her bed one by one, as if accepting them into a small parliament. Amos's coat remained for months beside the heater. Then, in late autumn, after the first real frost silvered the lot, Calder washed it by hand, dried it carefully, and placed it in a cedar-lined memory box for the new community room. He expected Vesper to protest. He expected the old shepherd to paw at the lid, to whine, to accuse him with those amber eyes that had seen through more of him than most people. Vesper watched, her left ear tipped forward. Her muzzle, now whiter than before, moved once as she sniffed the clean fabric. Then she turned, crossed the room, and lay down on the thick mat beside Calder's chair. Calder sat very still. "Good girl," he said. Vesper sighed in a way that suggested the compliment was late, but acceptable. In October, Graham Belrose returned from Arizona. He arrived wearing a camel-colored wool coat, too clean for the lot, black gloves, and the wary expression of a man who had come prepared to dislike what sentiment had purchased. He walked through the reinforced concession building with Calder, Norrie, Ellis, Tamsin, and Mavis. He asked about operating costs. Tamsin answered. He asked about liability. Norrie answered. He asked who would staff the warming station. Ellis handed him a volunteer roster. Graham studied the names for a long time. Rudy Marks, the truck driver from the February storm. Hannah Vale, the nurse. The Mayhews listed together for soup service, though someone had written "no loafers during storms" beside Mr. Mayhew's name. June Lyle for canine visitation support, which Mavis claimed was an official category because she had written it on official paper. Graham looked toward the old screen beyond the window. "I still don't think keeping it was easy," he said. "No one said easy," Norrie replied. He nodded slowly. "Mara wasn't trying to save a building, was she?" Calder waited. Graham's voice lowered. "She was trying to keep people from disappearing from each other in winter." No one answered for a moment. Then Mavis said, "I may put that on a brochure and pretend I wrote it." Graham looked at her. "You will not." "I absolutely might." He nearly smiled. For Graham Belrose, it was a public festival. By December, Aurora Vale was ready for its first community screening, not a grand reopening. Norrie rejected the phrase. Mavis accepted it only if allowed to add "of a semi-functional miracle," which Tamsin vetoed. Ellis suggested simply, "first winter screening." Calder painted the sign by hand. On the night of the screening, the sky cleared after sunset. Stars appeared sharp and numerous, flung across the dark like salt on black stone. The cold was deep enough that laughter came out as visible breath. Cars lined the lot in careful rows. Folding chairs stood near metal heaters. Volunteers handed out blankets, hot cider, and printed programs. The old speaker posts were no longer wired. Instead, Norrie had built a temporary outdoor sound system that carried cleanly across the snow. Under the opening credits, she layered a faint recording of the original 60mm projector running, barely there, more felt than heard. A heartbeat from the past, tucked beneath the new sound. Calder heard it and looked at her. Norrie pretended not to notice. Vesper stood beside them beneath the screen, wearing her old leather collar with the film reel tag polished clean. Her gait was slower now. Snow dotted her muzzle. But her tail moved gently when June arrived and knelt to greet her. Corinne, standing nearby with a thermos, said, "No dramatic running tonight." Calder said, "She knows?" Corinne looked at him. "I was talking to you." Mavis wore a dark purple coat and a pin shaped like a film reel. She moved among the crowd, correcting people's program folding technique and telling anyone who would listen that archival preservation had saved the evening, though she accepted cider as if it were tribute. Ellis stood near the entrance with his radio clipped at his side, watching the crowd the way a shepherd watches weather. Tamsin lingered by the reinforced support posts, pretending not to inspect her own work every 4 minutes. Graham helped paint one of the old speaker posts earlier that afternoon and still had a small streak of white on his glove. He had not noticed. No one told him. When the lights dimmed, the crowd quieted. The great white screen came alive. Winter Voices began not with a title card, but with wind. Then came an old shot of Lake Road under snow, a woman carrying groceries for her neighbor, a road crew truck pushing through drifts, Amos laughing behind the camera, Mara asking a fisherman what he did when the power went out, and the man answering, "Check on Edna first, complain second." The crowd laughed because some of them remembered Edna. Then the film moved through the seasons of cold, shut roads, lanterns in windows, hands passing thermoses, volunteers reading names over the radio, Aurora Vale's old sign glowing whole in a winter night from long ago. People who had passed on appeared beside people sitting now beneath blankets and stars, not as ghosts, not as monuments, more like lanterns handed down a line. Calder watched the faces around him instead of the screen. He saw Graham looking at Mara with his jaw tight. He saw June wiping her cheek, while Vesper leaned into her knee for a moment before returning to Calder's side. He saw Ellis smile when the old film showed a younger version of him getting his truck stuck in a snowbank and insisting to Amos that it was a strategic parking choice. He saw Norrie standing at the sound table, eyes bright, one hand resting near the mixer as if holding steady every voice her mother had gathered. Then came the final reel. Mara stood in the snowy lot, wearing the crooked hat. She spoke about not building a shrine, about warmth, about voices, about letting the next person know where to begin. "Amos," she said on screen, turning toward the camera, "what should the ending be?" The wind crossed the microphone. "Let spring film the rest," Amos answered. In the first restored version, the screen had gone black there. Tonight, it did not. Norrie's new footage appeared. Ellis opening the warming station door during a storm, snow flying behind him. Tamsin measuring a roof beam with the merciless focus of a winter judge. Mavis arguing with the coffee maker and losing badly. June kneeling in the snow with Vesper's head tucked under her chin. Graham painting a speaker post in silence, his clean coat dusted with white flakes. Corinne placing a new rug by Vesper's bed. Rudy stacking firewood by the concession wall. Hannah Vale labeling medical supply shelves. Then Calder appeared on screen, filmed without his knowledge. He was placing the warming station open sign in front of the ticket booth. He adjusted it once, stepped back, decided it was crooked, adjusted it again. Behind him, Vesper sat in the snow, watching with the patient disappointment of someone supervising a slow apprentice. The crowd laughed gently. Calder looked at Norrie. She did not apologize. The final shot came from a low angle near the old screen. Vesper moved across the snowy lot at a slow, dignified run, her left ear folded at the tip, her tail swaying. She did not look toward the demolished projection room. She did not search the sealed doors of the past. She came to the space beneath the screen where Calder and Norrie waited. Then the image faded into the white of falling snow. The credits rolled. No one clapped right away. That was how Calder knew the film had worked. Applause came later, rising carefully, then warmly, until it filled the lot and drifted out toward the frozen lake. Not loud enough to wake the dead. Just loud enough, perhaps, to let them know the living had found the thread. Afterward, Calder and Norrie sat in his old truck, with the windows cracked enough for Vesper to rest her muzzle on the door. The heater hummed. Outside, people talked in small clusters beneath the stars. Mavis was explaining something to Graham with violent hand gestures. Ellis was pretending not to enjoy praise. Tamsin was inspecting a support brace by moonlight because romance had limits. Calder watched Norrie's face in the dashboard glow. She looked older than when she had first driven in under the broken sign. Or maybe he was finally seeing the years that had passed while he kept looking down at maintenance lists. "I don't know how to fix the years I lost," he said. Norrie did not answer at once. Vesper's breath fogged the glass, then cleared, then fogged it again. Norrie looked at the screen, where the last of the credits had faded, and snow moved through the projector light like ash made gentle. "Don't fix them all in one night," she said. "Call me next month first." He nodded. The old answer would have been practical. About schedules. About whether Sunday still worked. About how phone calls were better with a purpose. Instead, he said, "I can do that." Norrie's mouth softened. A few moments passed. Then she added without looking at him, "And stay for the ending this time." Calder followed her gaze to the screen. The film was over. The night was not. People were still moving in the lot, gathering cups, folding chairs, laughing into the cold. Graham stood alone near a painted speaker post, one hand over the pocket where he kept his father's watch. Mavis placed Amos's name card back on the memory table. June kissed Vesper between the ears before heading to her car. Ellis checked the south exit. Tamsin finally stopped inspecting the brace and accepted a cup of cider. The ending, Calder realized, was not a line on a screen. It was maintenance. It was showing up next month. It was sending June a picture. It was letting Norrie's phone ring and not waiting for a technical question to justify answering. It was Vesper choosing the warm mat over the closed door. It was the old white screen standing under new stars, no longer pretending to be untouched, no longer ashamed of its scars. Calder reached over and lowered the truck window another inch for Vesper. The shepherd sighed, satisfied, her muzzle lifted toward the winter air. On the screen, Norrie had arranged for one final title to appear after the credits, simple white letters against black. Not every story is finished by the one who begins it, but those who remain can carry the light forward. The words stayed long enough for the crowd to read them. Then they faded. Aurora Vale did not go dark. The heaters glowed. The concession windows shone. The new sign by the door reflected lamplight onto the snow. And beneath the winter stars, with his daughter beside him and an old German shepherd breathing softly between them, Calder Wainwright stayed until the very last light was turned off by someone other than himself. Sometimes healing does not arrive like a grand miracle. Sometimes it comes quietly. Through an open door, a faithful old dog, a voice preserved in the cold, or one small choice to stay instead of running from the past. Calder, Norrie, and Vesper remind us that love is not always about holding on to what was. Sometimes love means carrying the light forward so others can find warmth when their own winter comes. May your own unfinished story be met with grace, patience, and a little light beneath the darkest sky. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like more stories of loyalty, healing, and hope, please subscribe and stay with us for the next one.